as some other people have said, it's really a pleasure to be here in Drain. I'm in love with the Drain Library, the Mildred Whipple Library as well. The last time I spoke to a group of people from Drain was in 1959, when I was student body president over at the high school. And so here I'm speaking since that time to Drain people. Are we Drainites? People from Drain?
The microphone is.
Speak into the microphone so we can hear.
Point the microphone at you.
There you go.
There, can you hear me better?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you catch my name and all of that?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, I'm in the fourth generation of Drain residents. My great-grandfather came here in 1870-something. He built a house. His name was Hickether. And he built a house on Laurel Hill Drive. Do you all know where Laurel Hill Drive is? Raise your hand if you know where Laurel Hill Drive is. Okay, well, you go north of town, nearly 2 miles, and then there's a road that turns off to the right. There used to be a mill there many years ago called Smith River Mill, or something to that effect. And you go about 100 yards and you cross Pass Creek. In my young days, that was a covered bridge. Not anymore. And then, could you give me a glass of water? I just lost my voice. That doesn't happen very often at all. You go another 7,500 yards, and then there's a lane that goes off to the right. Thank you. Excuse me just a second. And that lane would take you up to the Hickether Ranch House, which was built in about 1877. Don was going to show you a picture of that very shortly. Well, okay, yeah, maybe you can see that. That's the ranch house. And that house, it's one of the classic houses like the Drain house, but it was not maintained. And it was, Glenn, do you know when that was destroyed? In the late 70s, the early 80s, something like that. I have my cousin is back there, I thought he might know. Anyway, I wrote this book as a legacy for my grandchildren. And my motivation for writing this was my sister, Linda. She was 6, 7 years younger than I. And I'm a good storyteller, and I've told great stories of really a fascinating life that I've had across several countries. And I wasn't going to write that book, but my sister just wouldn't let up. And then along came COVID and the lockdown, and well, that was my motivation. I sat down and started writing. I didn't have to invent ideas, and that always amazes me about you authors that write fiction and you create these stories and you develop these stories. That's almost overpowering to me. But I had to remember well, and I had to do some family research as well. By the way, in terms of family research, I came up with a 45-page family tree, you know. A copy of which is in the library here, by the way, in the research library. And that was very interesting and very rewarding. Well, this family tree. So here's my name, Bob Kreitz. You all have a name. And I don't know, have any of you written your family tree or written any memoir? You know, you go 1 generation, 2 generations, and your name gets put farther down the list. And you go out 3 generations, and they're not. Somebody in your family may know the name, but they don't know a darn thing about you. And you go beyond that, and they don't know anything about you. So I want this to be a legacy for my family, especially for my tree, or my family tree. And because if I could find something that a great uncle or a great-great-great-grandfather wrote, I would be fascinated to read that. Wouldn't you be fascinated to read something like that about your family? And so that's what I felt like I've done for my family. But I think it's also a legacy for Drain. And this book has been picked up by, I've got 11 research libraries in Oregon that have picked up on this book, you know, including the Oregon Historical Society, the University of Oregon, you know, the Drain, Douglas County, Lane County, various other places have picked this up, as well as some museums. And I think the reason that they find that valuable is simply because, you know, history, the skeleton of history finds its flesh and its meat from the stories that many, many men and women have written over the years, either in short pieces or lawn pieces, or books. So I feel like this is a real contribution to history. And so that I hope that if you feel that way at all, some of you will think about not buying it and putting it in your research library. Not something that you just pass on and pass out of the family, but that it stays in the family as a source of historical research. The whole book isn't about Drain, but there's over 100 pages of my life in Drain. I lived a short while in Eugene, I lived a short while in Creswell, but I was born in 1940. Okay, now you can hold that house up again, Bella. Let's start with the house. Well, you saw the house. I was born in that house in 1940. Yeah, just show them the house one more time. Okay, I was born in this house, in the parlor room, where my grandfather was born. Wow. You know, back in those days, there was a doctor named Dr. Bertha DeVore. She was a lady doctor at Drain. Have any of you ever heard of Dr. Bertha? Yeah. Did I hear a yes? Yeah. Yep. And so she was the one that delivered us. We were a set of triplets.
Wow.
We were the first triplets born in Douglas County. Well, the first triplets that are recorded to be born. You know, there may have been some Native Americans born that way. Okay, why don't you show that picture of my mom? Now, my mom, Bertha Leona, was named after Dr. Bertha. Dr. Bertha's name was Bertha Leona. And so my mom was named after her, Bertha Leona. And Dr. Bertha had birthed my mother as well, or helped in the birth of my mother as well. Wow. Well, my mother is 19 years old in this picture. When she was 17 and a half, she was a junior at Drain High School. She quit school to marry my father, who dropped out of school in the 6th grade. He lived up at the end of Laurel Hill Drive. There were no school buses then. He had to walk so far to school that was just overbearing for him. And plus he had to work on the farm. He was actually a smart man, but he had a 6th grade education. He was a mill worker, a logger, a log truck driver most of his life. And of course they grew up in the Great Depression, which had quite an impact on the family. And so my childhood, the arc of my childhood would start with poverty and dysfunction. My dad, could you show them the next picture? My dad was drafted in World War II with 4 children, the triplets and a 15-month-old brother, George. Oh, wow. We called him Junior at the time. And so he got sent off to train as a soldier in Texas and then sent to Germany. And he fought in Germany. He got wounded, but it wasn't a serious wound. He was so depressed. He got wounded, and it was the kind of wound that many soldiers like. It's a minor wound, and we get him off the battlefield. So he got hit by some shrapnel once, and he was sent to a hospital in Paris. He was delighted. He was going to spend several days, who knows how long, in a Paris hospital with all those beautiful Parisian nurses. He spent one night in the hospital, and then they sent him back to the battlefield. So, I mean, this was a huge disappointment for my dad. But he came back a healthy man, but alcoholism took over his life. And if any of you, and in a crowd this size, you have to have known some alcoholism, and it can destroy a family. And so alcoholism had a tremendous impact on our family. When I was 18, from age 0 to 18, I lived in 18 different houses. In Eugene, Drain, a couple places in Eugene and whatnot. And so it had a tremendous impact. This is my great-grandfather, and I'm 4th generation because of him. Do any of you know Frank Jacobs? Okay, Frank Jacobs is my 2nd cousin. So this is Frank Jacobs' great-grandfather also. It is my great. Did any of you know Frank's mother? She just passed away. She was 100 or something. Yeah. So that was my first cousin once removed. And this was her grandfather, Horatio Seymour Baker. And so this is my grandmother's father. Okay? And so I've got tons and tons of roots in Drain, and quite a few family living here. One of my family members, I'd like to point him out, is Glenn Shaw. Could you stand up for a moment, Glenn? Could you just stand up? Okay, he might have a hard time standing up, but that's all right. Raise your hand, Glenn. When I was, Glenn and I were more like brothers when we were in high school. He's a year or two younger than I am. And my mother married, by the way, this adds into the story. My mother married 6 times and my father married 5 times. So if all of those little statistics don't impress you with family dysfunction, then you just start out impressionable. And so at one time, my mother married another drunk, and we kids hated him. He moved us to Cottage Grove, and we were wonderful, accepted, popular, active students at Drain High School. We were active in politics, active in sports, in all aspects. And so we ran away from home when we were 15 years old, and we lived in Cottage Grove, and we ran back to the ranch house where my grandma and grandpa lived, and we knew grandma would take care of us. And we were a long handful for our grandparents at that age, you know. And so we had all these aunts and uncles that lived in Drain. And so I went and lived with my Aunt Norella. That was Glenn's mom. And Bonnie went and lived with Aunt Norma. Norma Freeze. There were some Freezes in town. I'm related to any of the Freezes in town. My brother went and lived with my Aunt Leona Tolman. And so I lived with Glenn and his family for 3 years. And so he knows my story pretty intimately. Anyway, I want to quickly tell you the story. Because I had all these changes in life, I had a lot of changes in my life. And it was kind of built into my DNA. You know, I've been a school counselor, a school teacher, and I ran a nonprofit, and I've done a lot of things. And a little bit of that'll come out. And it's a reflection, probably, of my upbringing. But when I went through school, I had no plans on getting involved in student government, but a teacher, I believe it was Mr. Tolman, said, Bob, you got to run for student body president. The idea frightened the heck out of me, because I was a popular guy, but if I knew people, I was popular. I mean, I was outgoing, but I wasn't a student leader, and I didn't plan on being a student leader. But I was smart enough to know, and this is what I like young people to know, sometimes you have to listen to smart people. People are saying smart things to you, and you have to have the courage to say, maybe I better listen to that advice. Maybe I better take advantage of an opportunity. And I had that about myself, even though it scared the heck out of me. And so I got elected, for crying out loud, you know. But that was a growth experience, and it was a growth experience to being a student leader. And nobody in my family, you know, in my first cousins our age, no one was ever expected to go to college. Absolutely not. In fact, that was so remote in my mind that I couldn't even imagine myself being a college student. It's kind of like, this is the world I live in, and that's the world that college-educated people live in. And I don't know if any of you have had that experience in your life, but you can really get focused on a pattern of life for yourself. And that's one of the characteristics of poverty, and as you get locked into those locked-in systems. But eventually, I had another friend who influenced me in the same way, who was a college graduate, and I went on to college and got a BA and an MA. And I've always embraced learning. So I joined the Peace Corps. And Sergeant Shriver, you know who Sergeant Shriver was? Sergeant Shriver was JFK's brother-in-law, and he was the first director of the Peace Corps. So I joined the Peace Corps in 1964. Can you show them that picture, Doma? And if you can't see it in the back, you might want to move forward a little bit. So this is me in 1965 as a Peace Corps volunteer in Brazil. Now, the white-haired man was my partner, and we are standing at a health post in Brazil on the Paraguayan border. Now, the green in the picture is Paraguay. There was just a road that divided us, and Wednesday nights, I wasn't assigned to do this, but I taught English in a Paraguayan business school at night. So I was the first Peace Corps volunteer ever to serve in Paraguay, and the Peace Corps wasn't even in Paraguay for maybe 2 or 3 years. Okay, next picture. I ended up, my life moved quickly, and I'm not going into it all, you know, you'd have to be here all night. But I did become a teacher. I did become a teacher. I went to the University of Oregon and University of Washington. And this is me in Cibecue, Arizona. Cibecue, Arizona is on the Fort Apache Indian Reservation in Arizona, obviously. And he knows Cibecue. He knows Cibecue. He's been there. His parents were from Cibecue. I absolutely, raise your hand. I could not believe it that he was in Cibecue, Arizona, where I was a teacher. It's just amazing. Okay, after being in Cibecue, I went to Hillsboro, up by Portland, and I became a counselor and a teacher at Porter Junior High School and Hillsboro Senior High School. And then I was there for 4 years, and I got antsy feet. And you know, I'm not used to living in one place for 4 years. And I wanted to go overseas, you know. And let's see the picture again, I forgot it. So I got back in touch with the Peace Corps. I didn't join the Peace Corps as a volunteer. I joined the Peace Corps as an associate director of the Peace Corps in Guatemala. And so I went to Guatemala, and I supervised 40 Peace Corps volunteers that worked in the Western Highlands and in the Altiplano. This is a picture of my son. The little anglo boy in the middle is my son, who is now a school superintendent. And all the people around him are Mayan Indians who were joined together in this small village to celebrate the fact that a Peace Corps volunteer engineer had designed a potable water, a gravity-fed potable water system for the village. And this is the first running water they ever had in this village. And then the next picture is, I had many volunteers working on school garden programs where they distributed seeds and then taught people how to do French intensive gardening. So that the idea was for them to learn it in school, and hopefully we could get families using those seeds and increasing the vegetable intake in their families as well. It took me a long time to find my passion, and my passion turned out to be helping people. It just turned out to be that way. When I was in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to be. Were any of you like that? I mean, did you all know what you're going to be in high school? Okay. It takes a long while. In fact, I even got through my bachelor's degree at the University of Washington. I studied Latin American studies because I knew I'd enjoy studying that. But I still didn't know what I wanted to do. When I got out of the Peace Corps in Guatemala, by the way, I got sent to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., where I helped train Peace Corps volunteers to go back to Brazil. Well, things come and go, and I can only go into some of the things I get into. But here's a lady. Are any of you track and field fans? Well, I was an agent for this gal. This is Maria Mutola, who was she's an 800-meter runner from Mozambique. Mozambique is on the southeastern corner of Africa. Well, in Brazil, they speak Portuguese. I was fluent Portuguese. My wife is from Brazil. She speaks Portuguese. We speak Portuguese at home, by the way. Anyway, Maria Mutola, when she was 15, she ran in the Seoul Olympics at 15. Now, she didn't get out of the preliminaries, but my God, she ran in the Olympics. Well, she had been wanting to come to the United States and study and train. And I go into the story in my book, and I tell how that all happened. It fell upon my shoulders, and I made it possible for her to come here. And she went to Springfield High School, because by then I was a counselor at Briggs Middle School in Springfield. And I brought her here, and she went on to win the outdoor world championships 3 times and the indoor world champion 6 times. She won a bronze medal in Atlanta and a gold medal in Sydney, Australia. And I was her agent at the same time I was working as a counselor at Briggs. I was her counselor, I was her agent, and I negotiated contracts with Nike, and I negotiated contracts with, Berlin and London and all the places that she ran. I quit doing that shortly before she won the Olympic medal in Sydney because I started a nonprofit called Students Helping Street Kids International, or SHISKI I call it, by its initials. Yeah. What's your number? SHISKI. Okay. Well, this little girl, her name was Elizabeth dos Santos Pereira. That's how you'd say her name in Portuguese. Well, she's 7 years old, and I got students from Oregon to Maine to Florida, thousands of students across the nation, as a way of providing a service learning opportunity to them. They would raise money to give scholarships to these kids to go to private schools in their country. Because these kids were born in favelas. That's a Portuguese word for slums. And it was life-changing for the children to receive the scholarship, and it was very impactful upon the American students involved. In fact, I want to say Tom McCall, but it wasn't Tom McCall. It was another Oregon, who was a great last Republican senator in Oregon.
The governor.
Hatfield. It was Hatfield. Hatfield sent me a letter once, me and the students at Briggs, and complimented us on what we were doing and thinking that was wonderful. What did you say?
I said I must have failed history.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, then Dova became very impactful for me because she's Brazilian and was very involved in my work in getting these kids going. Well, one time we were at the Holiday Inn in Wilsonville, and this lady, I want to see if any of you can tell me who she is. This lady was the keynote speaker.
Sorry, I know her.
Okay. We'll show the crowd this. Okay, she was the keynote speaker at the Oregon Youth Summit. Dov and I had an exhibit set up explaining SHISKI. And she came up and was looking at that and looking at it, and I stayed back letting her take it all in. And then I walked up slowly to her. Are you recognizing who she is? And she, what's her name?
Too small.
Dr. Jane Goodall, the chimpanzee lady. And she looked at me, and with a soft smile on her face, she said, she didn't know my name. She said, would you do this in Tanzania with the Jane Goodall Institute? And boy, was I excited, and I did. And so we started sponsoring kids. We started sponsoring kids in Tanzania. This is the first girl I sponsored. Her name was Annunciata. She was in the small town of Kigoma, Tanzania, which is near, not far from where Jane Goodall studied the chimpanzees. I got a high school in Michigan that was predominantly black to sponsor her. So here's the interesting story is I found my soul, you might say. I really enjoy helping people. And the most enriching experience I ever had was with SHISKI and doing this. I did it for 22 years out of my bedroom. 22 years, and I made not one penny, but it was the most rewarding thing I have ever done. The most gratifying thing I'd ever done. And so one thing when I talk to student groups, I really like to encourage them to give to others. Because giving to others is going to put the most happiness in your own life as you are giving out to those others. The last picture I'd like to show, so I don't use up my time. These are my siblings. And my siblings are, could you read those names, Selma?
Richard, George,
Left to right.
Richard, George, Bonnie, Linda, and Bob.
Okay, George, the eldest one, has passed away. And in closing, I'd like to read the epilogue in my book. And as I was finalizing this book, my brother Richard, triplet, was in the final stages of his battle with prostate cancer. His strength and endurance were waning. So he asked me to read my manuscript to him over the phone. He was living up near the Portland area. And I would read to him for a while. It was especially enjoyable for us, reading those sections that covered our childhood together. This went on for many weeks. After reading the entire book to him, he asked me to reread the chapters about our childhood. Those reading sessions were very touching moments for us, allowing us to relive our early lives together, refreshing memories of those childhood experiences that bound our hearts and very identities so tightly together. Richard would have loved to be able to hold the printed copy of this book in his hands, to savor the words, gaze at every photo. But it was not to be. On July 28, 2021, we lost our precious brother before the book came out in print. I am comforted that he relished in the knowledge that his grandkids, great-grandkids, and other descendants throughout the generations would be able to experience the joy of holding this book in their hands and learning about our lives. Thank you very much.